The night sky was never truly dark anymore. Cities shined with countless lights, and satellites drifted silently above the earth. But tonight was different. Something new had arrived, something that did not belong. A massive alien fleet appeared in Earth's orbit, blocking out the stars. The ships were enormous, dark, and covered in strange patterns that pulsed like living creatures. There were thousands of them, stretching across the sky like a storm of metal. People on the ground looked up, their hearts filled with fear. Some stood frozen, staring at the sky in disbelief. Others ran, searching for shelter, though no one knew where to hide. The news channels quickly reported the event, but no one had any answers. All that was clear was this: humanity was no longer alone. Then a voice echoed across the world. It was deep, cold, and full of authority. It did not come from radios or televisions. It came from everywhere. Every phone, every screen, every speaker. Even people without devices could hear it, as if it spoke directly into their minds. We are the Xelvar. We have conquered many worlds. Your time has come. Silence followed. Then the message continued. Surrender, and you may live. Resist, and you will be destroyed. Governments across the world rushed to respond. World leaders held emergency meetings. The military prepared for battle. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Humanity had never faced anything like this before. The Xelvar technology was beyond anything humans had. Their ships were larger than entire cities, their weapons unknown. Within minutes, the invasion began. Dark ships entered Earth's atmosphere, moving with terrifying speed. They did not use rockets or jets. They floated as if the laws of physics did not apply to them. In the streets, people screamed as shadows covered the ground. Giant war machines descended from the sky, landing with heavy metallic thuds. The machines stood on 6 legs, their red eyes glowing like fire. The Xelvar soldiers followed. They were tall, their bodies covered in smooth armor that shifted like liquid metal. Their weapons were sleek and silent, but when they fired, bright energy beams cut through everything. Walls, cars, even the ground itself. Cities fell quickly. The Xelvar attacked with perfect coordination. They did not hesitate. They did not stop. Governments tried to communicate, but there was no response. The invaders did not negotiate. They did not ask for anything. They simply took. Within hours, Earth's largest cities were in chaos. Military bases were destroyed before jets could take off. Tanks were melted where they stood. The Xelvar did not need to use numbers. They had power, power beyond human understanding. Yet, something was strange. The Xelvar expected panic. They expected humans to beg for mercy. But there was something else in the air, something that made even the alien warriors uneasy. It was silence. There was no surrender, no desperate cries for peace. Instead, humanity was watching, waiting. And for the first time in their long history of conquest, the Xelvar felt something unusual. Doubt. The Xelvar did not waste time. From their warships in orbit, they unleashed powerful energy blasts onto Earth's surface. Buildings crumbled, roads melted. The sky turned red as flames spread through cities. But something was wrong. The Xelvar had conquered many planets before, but humans were different. Other species had always begged for mercy. They had sent messages of surrender. They had tried to offer their leaders in exchange for survival. But the humans, they did nothing. There were no desperate messages, no white flags, no attempts to contact the Xelvar. The humans simply disappeared. Warlord Vraxis, the leader of the invasion, watched the screens inside his massive command ship. He expected to see humans in chaos. He expected to hear them crying out in fear. Instead, he saw empty streets, silent cities, and abandoned buildings. Where are they? Vraxis growled. His sharp claws tapped against the metal floor. A Xelvar officer stood beside him, his armor shifting like liquid. We do not know, Warlord. They are not fighting back. They are not running. They are simply gone. Vraxis narrowed his glowing eyes. He did not like this. It was not normal. When the Selvar invaded a planet, they crushed their enemies within hours. But now, even after their first strike, the humans had not reacted. Something was wrong. Deploy ground forces, Vraxis ordered. Find them. Erase them. The streets of Earth. Selvar soldiers marched through the ruined cities. Their metal boots echoed in the empty streets. Smoke covered the sky, making it hard to see. The soldiers moved carefully. Their weapons were ready. Their glowing red eyes scanned every corner. But there was no one. Shattered cars lay abandoned. Food sat untouched on tables inside houses. It was as if humans had vanished into thin air. One Selvar commander stopped. He raised his hand, signaling his squad to halt. His scanners detected movement. Something was there. He pointed his weapon toward an alley. A sound came from the shadows, a soft click. The commander barely had time to process what happened next. A bright explosion erupted from the alley, sending fire and metal flying through the air. The blast tore through the Selvar soldiers, throwing their broken bodies against the walls. The commander fell, his armor cracked, his vision darkening. And then he saw them. Humans. They stepped out of the shadows, wearing strange suits of armor. Their weapons did not glow with energy like the Selvars. Instead, they fired silent, fast projectiles, too fast for the Selvar to react. One by one, the remaining soldiers fell. The last thing the commander heard was a human voice, calm and steady. "They don't know, do they?" Then everything went black. The Selvar's mistake. Vraxis watched the screen as reports came in. His forces were being attacked, not by desperate survivors, but by well-trained, well-equipped warriors. The humans were not weak. They were not running. They had been waiting. That Selvar had made a mistake. They thought they were the hunters. But now, for the first time, they realized the truth. The humans had set a trap. And it had just begun. Warlord Vraxis stood on the bridge of his command ship, his sharp claws tapping against the control panel. The screens before him showed Earth's ruined cities, but something was wrong. His forces had landed. His war machines had crushed everything in their path. And yet, humanity had not surrendered. There were no desperate cries, no leaders offering peace, no civilians pleading for mercy. Instead, there was silence, a silence that felt unnatural. Vraxis turned to one of his officers, his glowing red eyes narrowing. "Where is their military?" The officer hesitated before answering. "We are uncertain, Warlord. We destroyed their bases. Their weapons are outdated. Their vehicles are nothing compared to our technology." He swallowed, his armored hands twitching slightly. "And yet, they do not act like a defeated species." Vraxis growled, his patience wearing thin. He had led invasions across the galaxy. He had crushed mighty civilizations, wiped out entire armies, but never had an enemy reacted like this. "Send more ground units. Find them," he ordered. "Wipe them out before they cause more trouble." The empty cities. Selvar troops moved through the streets, their energy weapons ready. They searched every building, every alley. But everywhere they went, they found nothing. Homes were empty. Shops were untouched. There was no food shortage, no bodies in the streets. It was as if humanity had simply disappeared. The soldiers grew uneasy. The Selvar were used to war. They were used to enemies who screamed, who fought back with everything they had. But this was something different. Then the reports started coming in. Squads missing. Vehicles destroyed. Communications disrupted. The Selvar commanders tried to stay calm, but the pattern was clear. Something was hunting them. The first signs of fear. Vraxis stared at the latest battle reports, his claws digging into the armrest of his chair. Dozens of squads have been eliminated in the last hour. Not in open battle, not by an army, by ghosts. The humans were not fighting in the streets. They were not gathering in large groups. Instead, they struck from the shadows, fast, precise, and deadly. They are using guerrilla tactics, an officer muttered. We cannot track them. Vraxis slammed his fist on the panel. Find them. Destroy them. But deep inside, for the first time in his life, he felt something new. Doubt. A trap revealed. In a ruined factory on the outskirts of a fallen city, a Selvar squad advanced carefully. Their scanners showed strange energy fluctuations, but they could see nothing. Check every corner, the commander ordered. His soldiers moved with discipline, scanning for any sign of life. Then a metallic click echoed through the air. The commander's eyes widened. He had heard that sound before. A trap. Before he could react, a powerful explosion erupted from the walls, sending fire and shrapnel through the squad. The commander hit the ground, his vision flickering. He tried to move, but his limbs refused to obey. Through the smoke, he saw them. Humans. They wore dark armor, their helmets hiding their faces. Their weapons were silent, yet every shot found its target. The remaining Selvar soldiers collapsed in seconds. One human knelt beside the wounded commander. The alien tried to reach for his weapon, but the human simply placed a boot on his arm, stopping him. The human spoke, his voice calm. You don't understand, do you? The commander's breath was heavy. He could not answer. The human leaned closer. You thought we were weak. He pointed to the ruined city around them. You thought we were running. The commander struggled to stay conscious, but darkness was creeping in. The last thing he heard was the human's final words. We were never running. We were waiting. The war changes. Back on the command ship, Vraxis felt the shift. His forces were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The silence of humanity was no longer a sign of weakness. It was a warning. And now, the real fight was about to begin. The Selvar had always been the conquerors. Their empire stretched across the stars, built on the ruins of defeated civilizations. No species had ever stood against them for long. But now, for the first time, the Selvar felt something they had never known before. Fear. Warlord Vraxis stood at the center of his command ship, his red eyes fixed on the battle reports flashing across the screens. His forces were still losing, not in massive battles, not in direct combat, but in the shadows. Entire squads had gone silent. Vehicles had been destroyed without a single distress signal. The mighty Selvar army, which had expected an easy victory, was slowly being hunted. Vraxis clenched his fists. How is this possible? His voice was sharp, filled with frustration. An officer hesitated before speaking. Warlord, the humans are not fighting like other species. They are using tactics we do not understand. Vraxis turned sharply. Explain. The officer swallowed. They do not engage directly. They strike. They disappear. They use traps, ambushes, misdirection. We scan buildings, and they are empty. We move forward, and suddenly we are surrounded. It is as if they know our every move. Vraxis narrowed his eyes. Impossible. The officer hesitated, then spoke again. We have captured a few humans, Warlord. We interrogated them, but they did not seem afraid. One of them even laughed. Vraxis stiffened, laughed. Yes, Warlord. He said, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. A heavy silence filled the room. Then an alarm blared through the ship. Emergency alert. Multiple ships destroyed. Vraxis spun toward the main screen. His eyes widened in shock. The fleet above Earth, his mighty warships, capable of wiping out planets, was under attack. The sky burns. High above the planet, Selvar warships floated in formation, their powerful shields glowing in the darkness. They were designed to withstand direct assaults. Nothing had ever broken through them before. But the humans did not attack like others. They did not send large fleets to engage in open battle. Instead, something far more terrifying happened. From the darkness of space, hidden weapons platforms activated. Enormous railguns, hidden within the orbits of Earth's moons and satellites, fired at impossible speeds. Massive projectiles, moving faster than any Selvar scanner could detect, tore through the shields like paper. One by one, the warships exploded in silent bursts of fire. The Selvar inside never had time to react. The humans had known this invasion was coming. They had prepared. And now, the fleet that was supposed to bring Earth to its knees was being reduced to wreckage. The ground war collapses. On the surface, Selvar forces continued their desperate search for the enemy. They no longer walked with confidence. Their squads moved cautiously, scanning every shadow, every building. But it did not matter, because the humans were already there. A Selvar commander led his troops through the ruins of a city, his weapon raised. The silence around him felt unnatural. His sensors showed nothing, but he could feel it. Something was watching them. Then, a sharp sound, like a whistle, cut through the air. Before he could react, the first soldier in his squad collapsed. A second later, another fell. The commander spun around, trying to find the enemy. Nothing. He shouted orders, but his voice was drowned out by explosions. Buildings crumbled as hidden charges detonated, trapping the Selvar inside. The humans had not run away. They had led the Selvar into a trap, and now the walls were closing in. The fall of the invasion. Back on the command ship, Vraxis felt a cold realization settle in his chest. This was not a battle. This was a slaughter. His mighty army, his invincible fleet, they were being picked apart piece by piece. And then, for the first time, a human message appeared on his screen. A single line of text, written in perfect Selvar language. "You should have left us alone." Vraxis clenched his fists. His empire had never lost before. But now, in mere hours, it was crumbling. And worst of all, the humans were just getting started. The mighty Selvar fleet was burning. Warlord Vraxis stood frozen in the center of his command ship, staring at the screens. His red eyes reflected the destruction of his warships. He could hear the panicked voices of his officers as they tried to regain control. But there was no control left. The humans had done something no other species had ever done. They had turned the hunters into prey. For the first time in his long life, Vraxis felt something deep in his chest. A heavy, suffocating feeling. Doubt. How had this happened? How had an inferior species, one with such primitive technology, managed to strike back? His claws tightened into fists. This was not over yet. He would not allow it. The hidden army. On the surface, the Selvar forces were in full retreat. The war machines that once marched through Earth's cities were now nothing more than twisted metal. The six-legged walkers that once struck fear into human hearts lay in burning heaps. But the humans did not let them escape. They followed. They hunted. In the ruins of an old military base, a group of Selvar soldiers ran through the rubble. Their once perfect formations were broken. They no longer moved like conquerors. They moved like animals trying to escape a wildfire. One soldier turned his head, scanning the shadows. His heart pounded inside his chest. He could feel something watching him. Then he saw them. The humans stepped out of the ruins, their dark armor blending with the night. They carried weapons that did not glow with energy, but fired with deadly precision. The Selvar barely had time to raise their weapons before the humans attacked. Silent, fast, efficient. One by one, the invaders fell. The last Selvar soldier standing raised his hands, his voice shaking. "Mercy," he begged. A human soldier lowered his weapon. His face was hidden behind his helmet, but his voice was calm. "Did you show us mercy?" The Selvar opened his mouth, but before he could answer, everything went black. The final message. Back on the command ship, Vraxis listened as the reports flooded in. Ground forces eliminated. War machines destroyed. Fleet, decimated. His claws trembled. He had never known defeat, never even imagined it. Then the human message appeared again on his screen. "You should have left us alone." Vraxis growled. He refused to accept this. He was a warlord of the Selvar Empire. He would not let this be the end. His fingers moved across the control panel. He still had one final option. A last resort. A weapon of destruction powerful enough to erase an entire continent. If he could not conquer Earth, then he would burn it. He activated the weapon. A countdown appeared on the screen. 3 minutes until firing. Vraxis exhaled. It was done. But then, the lights flickered. The control screens turned black, and a new voice echoed through the ship. A human voice. "Nice try." Vraxis' eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The humans had hacked his ship. Before he could react, alarms blared. His own warship, the strongest in the fleet, began shutting down. A final message appeared on the screen. "This is our planet. You are not welcome here." Then, boom! The ship rocked violently as explosions tore through its hull. Fire spread through the control room. Vraxis fell to the ground, his vision flickering. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Earth, silent, strong, and victorious. The war ends. The remaining Selvar ships turned and fled, their commanders too afraid to continue fighting. They left behind their fallen soldiers, their ruined machines, and the wreckage of what was once an invincible fleet. And above them, the humans watched. They had won, not just with weapons, but with patience, with strategy, with something no alien species had ever expected. With the will to fight back. The invasion was over, and when the next enemy looked toward Earth, they would remember one thing. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not afraid. And when humans fought back, it was over in minutes. The mighty Selvar fleet had been reduced to scattered wreckage. What was once an unstoppable invasion force had been crushed in mere hours. The few Selvar ships that survived flowed into space, their commanders too afraid to continue the fight. But even as they ran, they knew the truth. There was no going back. The Selvar Empire did not tolerate failure. For those who returned in defeat, there would be no mercy. Vraxis awakens. Warlord Vraxis opened his eyes, his vision blurry. The sound of alarms still echoed in his ears. His ship, his flagship, was in ruins. Smoke filled the air, sparks flickered from broken control panels, and the bodies of his officers lay scattered across the floor. Pain surged through his body as he tried to move. His armor was cracked, his claws weak. He had never felt this way before. He had never known defeat. With a groan, he pulled himself up. The main screen in front of him flickered, barely functional. It showed that Selvar fleet, what was left of it, escaping Earth's orbit. He let out a slow breath. They had lost. The realization hit him like a hammer. The great warlord Vraxis, the conqueror of 100 worlds, had been defeated by humans. His claws tightened into fists. How? How had a species with inferior technology, outdated weapons, and no interstellar army done this? Then he remembered the message. "You should have left us alone." The words echoed in his mind. He had underestimated them. He had thought humans would beg for mercy, that they would surrender like all the others. But they hadn't begged. They had waited. They had set traps, used misdirection, turned his own strength against him. They had known this war was coming. And that meant one thing. Humans had studied the Selvar. For how long? Months? Years? It didn't matter now. They had prepared. And the Selvar had walked straight into their trap. The exiled fleet. A few hours later, what remained of the Selvar fleet drifted in deep space. The commanders of the surviving ships gathered in a secure communication channel. Their faces flickered across Vraxis' damaged screen. One of them, a high-ranking general, spoke first. "What do we do now?" His voice was filled with quiet panic. "We cannot return to the Empire. The High Council will execute us for this failure." Another commander nodded. "They will wipe out our bloodlines. There is no forgiveness for what happened today." Vraxis remained silent, his mind racing. He had led this invasion with absolute confidence. And now he had nowhere to go. No home. No army. No future. The High Council would never accept failure. If they returned, their own people would destroy them. A third commander leaned forward. "We must rebuild. Gather what forces we have left. Hide. Survive." The others murmured in agreement, but Vraxis felt something else inside him. Something dark and heavy. Hatred. The humans had done this to him, to his empire, to his future. He would not forget. The shadow of revenge. Vraxis took a slow breath, his claws tapping against the metal of his broken command chair. Revenge. It was the only path left. If the High Council would no longer accept him, then he would not bow to them. He would create his own army. And one day, he would return to Earth. Not as an invader, not as a warlord of the Selvar Empire, but as something worse. He leaned forward, his glowing red eyes narrowing. "Let the High Council consider us dead," he said, his voice low and cold. "We will build in the shadows. We will grow stronger. And when the time is right," his claws tightened, "we will make the humans suffer." The other commanders nodded slowly. They had no other choice. For now, they would hide. But one day, they would strike again. Earth remains silent. Back on Earth, the skies were clear once more. The last of the Selvar ships had vanished beyond the stars, and the planet was finally at peace. But humanity did not celebrate. There were no victory parades, no grand speeches, because humans knew the truth. This was not the end. That Selvar would return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day. And when they did, humanity would be ready. Because if there was one lesson the universe had learned today, it was this. When humans fought back, it was over in minutes. The stars were quiet. The Selvar fleet had vanished into the darkness, defeated and humiliated. Earth was safe, for now. But the war was not over. The humans knew this. They had won a battle, but war was never just about battles. It was about preparation, survival, and most of all, knowing your enemy. And the humans had learned something important. That Selvar would return. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day they would come back, stronger and angrier than before. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The hidden survivors. Deep beneath the ruins of an old human military base, a group of soldiers gathered in a dark underground room. Screens flickered in front of them, showing satellite images, captured Selvar data, and war reports. General Harris stood at the center of the room, arms crossed. His uniform was torn, his face covered in dirt, but his eyes were sharp. He had fought in the battle. He had seen what the Selvar were capable of. And he knew this was only the beginning. A scientist, Dr. Patel, stepped forward. "Sir, we've analyzed the Selvar technology we recovered from the battlefield." She pointed to a holographic projection of a Selvar warship. "Their ships are fast, but they rely on centralized command. If we can disrupt their communication, we can disable entire fleets before they attack." Harris nodded. "And their ground forces?" A soldier, Captain Lee, tapped on a screen. "They are strong, but predictable. They don't adapt quickly. That's why we defeated them. They rely too much on overwhelming power and direct attacks." Harris turned to the room. "Then we have an advantage." He took a deep breath before speaking again. "We are not waiting for them to return." The soldiers and scientists exchanged glances. "We are taking the fight to them." The Shadow Fleet. Far from Earth, hidden in an asteroid field, the remaining Selvar ships drifted in silence. Inside his damaged command ship, Warlord Vraxis sat in the darkness, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy. His claws tapped against the metal table. His empire had abandoned him. The High Council had already declared him dead. But Vraxis was very much alive, and he had no intention of fading into history. A Xelvar officer stood beside him. "Warlord, our scouts have located a distant moon with the resources we need. We can rebuild our fleet there." Vraxis nodded slowly. "Good. Begin immediately. We have no time to waste." The officer hesitated before speaking again. "And the humans?" Vrax's red eyes burned with hatred. "They think they have won." His voice was calm, but there was an edge of rage behind it. "They believe we will hide in the shadows forever." He leaned forward, his claws tightening. "But we will not hide. We will rise." The officer nodded and left the room, leaving Vraxis alone with his thoughts. He had underestimated the humans once. He would not make that mistake again. Next time, he would not come with an invasion force. He would come with annihilation. The first step. Back on Earth, General Harris stood on a platform, looking at something that had never been seen before. A new fleet. Not just any fleet. A human fleet. Using recovered Xelvar technology, humans had begun building warships of their own. Stronger, faster, and more advanced than anything Earth had ever created before. The first prototype ship stood in front of him, sleek and deadly. It was built for one purpose, to carry the fight beyond Earth. Harris turned to the engineers beside him. "How soon before the first mission?" Dr. Patil adjusted her glasses. 6 months. Harris nodded. "Good." The war had started with an invasion. It would end with a counterattack. Because humanity had learned something important. Waiting for the enemy to strike first was a mistake. This time, humans would not wait. This time, they would strike first. The future of war. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, 2 enemies prepared for battle. One fought for revenge. The other fought for survival. And in the middle of the stars, the next great war was about to begin. But this time, it would not be fought on Earth. This time, humanity would bring the war to the Xelvar. And when humans fought back, it would be over in minutes. The cold silence of space stretched endlessly, dotted with stars that had watched over wars for millennia. But now, a new war was coming. A war where humanity was no longer the prey. A war where the hunters had become the hunted. The first strike. On the edge of a distant star system, a Xelvar supply station floated quietly in space. It was an isolated outpost, far from the core worlds of the Xelvar Empire. The officers inside were relaxed, unaware of the silent danger approaching. Then, the alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the station as the control room filled with warning signals. Unidentified ships detected. The commander, a tall Xelvar with deep scars across his face, snapped his head toward the screen. His yellow eyes widened in disbelief. Ships, unknown design, sleek, fast, and moving straight toward them. "What species are they?" he barked. The officer at the console shook his head, his voice shaking. "Unknown, sir." He paused, then whispered, "They are human." Silence filled the room. The Xelvar commander froze. That was impossible. Humans didn't have interstellar warships. They had been stuck on their single planet. Weak, primitive. But now, they were here. And they were attacking. The wrath of humanity. Before the Xelvar could react, the human warships fired. Unlike the energy weapons of the Xelvar, the human weapons were different. Simple, but devastating. Kinetic rounds, massive projectiles traveling at unimaginable speeds, tore through the station's defenses like paper. Boom! The first impact sent shockwaves through the station. The outer defenses crumbled. Boom! The second shot pierced straight into the reactor core. Inside, the Xelvar soldiers panicked. "They have found us," one screamed. "We must send a distress call," another shouted. The commander slammed his fist against the console. "Do it." But before the signal could be sent, the final shot struck. The station exploded in a bright flash, debris scattering across space, and the human fleet, they were already gone. Silent, precise, unstoppable. The message is clear. Back on Earth, General Harris stood in a hidden command center, watching the battle feed on a large screen. Around him, officers and scientists monitored the success of the mission. One of the younger officers let out a slow breath. "It worked," he whispered. Harris nodded. The mission had been a success. The Selvar were now running, hiding, looking over their shoulders. For the first time, they knew what it felt like to be hunted. A communication officer turned to Harris. "Sir, we intercepted a Selvar message from a nearby system. Their empire knows about the attack." Harris's lips curled into a grim smile. "Good." He looked around at his team. "Make no mistake. This is just the beginning. We will strike again, and again, until they understand one thing." He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This galaxy does not belong to them." The officers nodded. The war had changed. No longer were humans waiting for an invasion. Now, they were the ones invading. Vraxis knows the truth. In the depths of space, inside a hidden war camp, Warlord Vraxis listened to the reports. His officers stood before him, their faces filled with fear. "They destroyed our station in minutes," one officer said. "It was a direct attack. No warning, no mercy." Another officer clenched his fists. "This is an insult to our empire. We must strike back immediately." Vraxis, however, said nothing. He simply stared at the screen, watching the footage of the attack. His red eyes flickered with something dangerous. Not anger, not fear, but respect. The humans had learned well. They had adapted, improved, evolved. In a matter of months, they had gone from defenders to predators. And that made them the most dangerous enemy that Selvar had ever faced. Vraxis finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "No," he said. "We will not attack yet." His officers looked at him in confusion. "But, Warlord." Vraxis raised a claw, silencing them. His gaze remained fixed on the human warships. "They are no longer the weak species we once thought," he said. "They are something else now." A slow, dark smile formed on his face. "And if we are not careful, they may become something far worse." His eyes narrowed. "They may become what we once were." He turned to his officers. "We must change our strategy. We are no longer fighting a weak species." His voice hardened. "We are fighting a species that has learned to strike first." The officers stood frozen as the reality sank in. The war was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. And for the first time, the Selvar were on the losing side. The final battle approaches. Across the galaxy, the echoes of war spread. The Selvar, once the greatest power in the stars, now found themselves running. The humans, once seen as prey, were now feared hunters. But both sides knew the truth. This war was not over. It was only beginning. And when the final battle came, only one species would remain standing: humanity, or the Selvar. And if history had proven anything, it was this. When humans fought back, it was over in minutes. The war had reached its final stage. For months, the humans had attacked Selvar outposts, cutting off their supply lines, striking deep into their territory. The once powerful Selvar Empire was now on the defensive, something they had never experienced before. And now it was time for the final blow. The invasion begins. A massive human fleet gathered near a distant Selvar world. Torvax 5, a heavily fortified military planet. It was one of the last strongholds of the Selvar. If it fell, the war would be over. General Harris stood on the command deck of the human flagship, staring at the planet on the screen. Around him, officers prepared for battle. Harris took a deep breath. "Today, we end this war." The order was given. The human fleet moved forward. The Selvar's last stand. On the planet's surface, Warlord Vraxis watched the human fleet descend. He had known this day would come. His officers stood behind him, waiting for orders. "What are your commands, Warlord?" one asked. Vraxis stared at the incoming human ships. He had spent his entire life conquering other species, never once considering that his own would be on the other side of a war like this. Now he had no choice. "They will expect us to fight to the last soldier," Vraxis said. The officer nodded. "Yes, and we shall." "No," Vraxis interrupted. He turned to face his soldiers, his red eyes burning with an emotion they had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but understanding. "We surrender. The war ends." The entire command room fell silent. That Selvar had never surrendered before, but Vraxis was not a fool. He had studied the humans. He had seen what they were capable of. Fighting them would not save the Selvar, but surrendering, that could give his species a future. Minutes later, a message was sent to the human fleet. General Harris read it twice, his expression unreadable. "They are surrendering," an officer whispered in disbelief. Harris exhaled slowly. He had expected a brutal last stand. He had expected the Selvar to fight until the last soldier. But this was wisdom. "Accept their surrender," Harris said. "We didn't come to wipe them out. We came to end the war." A new era. The war that had started with an invasion of Earth was now over. The Selvar, once the greatest empire in the galaxy, had fallen. And humanity. They had done the impossible. They had risen from being prey to becoming the most feared force in the galaxy. But victory did not bring celebration. It brought responsibility. Harris stood on a high platform, looking over the Selvar cities below. For the first time, these planets were no longer under the rule of warlords. Instead of destruction, humanity had chosen mercy. They had not only won the war, they had changed the rules of war itself. And now, a new era was beginning. An era where humanity was no longer just fighting to survive. They were leading, guiding, and shaping the future of the galaxy. Because if history had proven anything, it was this. When humans fought back, it was over in minutes. The end.